Welcome to the True Story London podcast. I'm Michelle Toth. In this podcast, we listen to a true personal story told live at one of our shows in London, followed by a conversation with the storyteller about their background, process, story themes, and more. Today's storyteller is Sina Leasuasu, sharing her story of how a careless comment from a stranger led to a crisis of identity. Her story highlights the reflective power of storytelling as she grapples with concepts of both cultural and social identity and what they mean for her. In our talk afterward, we discuss just how much has changed and evolved for Sina since the telling of the story. But first, let's listen to Sina's story recorded live at 21 Soho.
Kia ora koutou. Hello, everyone. My name is Sina. I'm from a tiny island at the bottom of the world called Aotearoa, or what you probably know as New Zealand, and what is definitely not Australia. I'm someone who identifies as mixed race, so my mum is Indigenous, she's Māori, and my dad is from Samoa. If you've never heard of Samoa, it's where Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson comes from. If you've never heard of The Rock, sucks to be you. Identifying as mixed race was pretty hard at times, and it was especially difficult because I can't speak either of the languages. The name Sina is also quite Polynesian, and there's this famous story in Samoan mythology called Sina and the Eel. And it talks about the origin of the first coconut tree. So it was 2012. I was in my third year of drama school. And after some pretty angsty teenage years, I was beginning to feel like I'd found a safe space and made some meaningful friendships. Making friends growing up, I always felt like I was trying to fit myself into different shaped boxes. And this was due to a lot of things, but I think the ambiguity of my ethnicity really played into that. So often I would code switch, such as changing the way I spoke slightly, but obviously this just played into the imposter syndrome even more. So it was nice to be in this place where it seemed like people understood and appreciated differences. So I'm outside smoking with some classmates. And among this group is a person from another course that we share the building with. And so this particular group, they focus on performing cultural dances, songs, and stories, Samoan being one of them. And as we were chatting, somehow my name came up in conversation because I think this person from the other group hadn't realized that I was actually part Samoan. So I was like, yeah, my dad's Samoan. They looked at me with surprise. Oh, can you speak Samoan? No, I can't. And it was like the next part happened in slow motion. So they looked me dead in the eyes, blew some cigarette smoke out, and with a laugh on their lips said, "You don't deserve to be called Sina." It took me a couple of seconds to realize what they just said to me. You don't deserve to be called Sina. It was like time stood still. And I felt a bit sick to my stomach. I feel like I'm transported back in school where my classmates would joke in Samoan and I'd pretend to know what they were, saying. So I'd laugh too, but really I wanted to cry. I wanted to say to this person, "Fuck you, you don't know me." But I didn't. Instead, the conversation moved on and I carried on smoking my cigarette like I didn't give a shit. Internally, though, I was spiraling. I felt angry, mostly at myself. Like, why didn't I say anything? Were they right? Was everyone else thinking the same thing? And also, how did all the hard work I'd done on being okay with myself, how was that threatening to crumble because of 7 words? Was my identity really that fragile? So this moment, which probably seemed insignificant to the outside eye, stayed with me for a really long time, and I didn't really think about it until July 2020. COVID is everywhere. People are panic buying toilet paper. And during my daily doom scroll on Instagram, I come across this image, and it's the part from the census form that asks you about your ethnicity. And across it are the words, mixed rage. I click into this profile and I see the person that's running it is also mixed race. But what was really intriguing to me was that this person didn't identify as part white and part other. Because the thing is, most of my friends are mixed race, most of my cousins are mixed race, but I didn't really feel valid in the way that I felt because both of my parents are brown. And that was a pretty lonely feeling. So here I was on Instagram looking at this person who had two parents of color and was openly identifying as mixed race. Representation totally matters. I toyed with the idea of reaching out to this person, but I felt kind of weird about it. You know, what if they didn't think I was mixed race enough? Would they even reply? Fuck it. I finally said, and I messaged this person and nervously waited for them to respond. I thought about what was it that gave me the courage to reach out. And I thought about all the times that I'd been called plastic and how I got called. Someone told me that I wasn't a real Māori because I didn't like certain foods. And I thought about that time when I got told that I did not deserve to be called Sina. And I realized I was still quite angry about that, but not at myself. And I was ready to use this anger to speak out. Ping. I get a message notification on Instagram, and it's this person that I messaged. We got to talking, and I just feel this enormous wave of relief because this person just gets it. They know what it's like to be called so lucky because you've got two cultures and it's the best of both worlds. But most of the time you feel like neither of those worlds wants you. They've had people curious to know your background and call you things like exotic. Or try and guess where you're from, like it's a fun game where you're always the loser. From there, we met with others who are also mixed race, who are eager to share and connect and feel validated. And what was amazing was that even coming all the way from New Zealand, I was able to find a group of people who could share the same experiences and who I could relate to theirs. Since then, I'm proud to say that I'm one of 5 members of the collective Mixed Rage, and I've had my work shown in 2 exhibitions centered around exploring my feelings about being a person of mixed heritage. The work that I do, it's about connecting with people, but most importantly, it's about reclamation of power. Sharing moments and stories like this so openly, slowly but surely makes them feel less scary. By tucking them away, refusing to think about them, only made me feel more ashamed about who I am. And I don't want to be ashamed anymore. So reflecting back on that day in 2012, I know now that this was the day of the beginning of the fire that I carry with me every day. The fire that encourages me to speak out, connect, and empower others. The fire that says keep going and engulfs me in its warmth when the imposter syndrome is hitting hard. The fire that's constantly pushing me to be creative and gently reminding me that I do deserve to be called Sina. Thank you.
Sina, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
It's so nice to see you again.
Yeah, you too.
So how does it sound to you hearing your story back after quite a little while?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think it's really interesting just to hear me use terms that I don't really use anymore.
Well, you can tell us more about that as we get into the conversation, because I think that's an interesting part of doing these discussions a year and a half after the telling of the story, which was 10 years after the time of the story. So just seeing how your own thinking about yourself has evolved has been a really interesting part of these conversations. Perhaps we can start at the beginning. I'd love to know a little bit more about what it was like growing up in your family, your extended family, in these 2 cultures, developing as a young person. What was your family life like growing up?
Yeah, so I come from a pretty big family. So my mum is like one of 5 and my dad's one of 7. And so I had a lot of cousins growing up. So my dad's side, I think there's probably about 32 first cousins.
Whoa. Oh my gosh. It's like a school.
yeah. We're very, very Polynesian in that way. So, and then on my mum's side, I think it's about 16 of us. So, and we're really close with my mum's side. So yeah, I'm just always used to having loads of people around me all the time. And what's funny is that a few of my cousins are also mixed heritage. But it's just something I felt like I didn't really see anyone else struggling with, which just made me feel worse in a way, because I was like, oh God, I'm so alone in this.
It's so tough to feel alone with anything. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think like that's not to say that they might not have felt the same way as me, but I think it just wasn't really something that we talked about.
Was it just a hard thing to say out loud?
Yeah, or I think it was just more sort of factual. So it was just like, well, yeah, your mum is from here, your dad is from here. That's just the way it is. And I think any sort of complicated feelings that came with that, for me anyway, I felt like just weren't really talked about. Because I do like remember sort of bringing it up, like growing up, sort of saying like, oh, I wish I wasn't, half whatever. And then sort of being met with, oh, you shouldn't say that, you should be proud of where you're from. Or sort of showered with compliments about even like things like my skin, and just, I guess, being made to feel like I should feel like I'm lucky to be of the heritage that I am, which I do. I absolutely love where I come from, and I'm so proud of who I am. But growing up, sort of going through these like identity crises and being met with like, well, you should just feel lucky to be part Māori and part Samoan, and you're like, well, I don't feel lucky. So,
and yes, that is certainly connected to your heritage, but it also is connected to being a young person where you're still trying to figure out who you are in the world just as a human.
Yeah.
And so that it gets complicated when other people start telling you early and often who you should be and how you should feel.
Absolutely. I think the moments in growing up, especially as a young person, because I feel like that's where I struggled the most, was, just exclusion from groups at school. There was this moment, I don't know why it's sort of stuck in my mind all these years later, but in New Zealand, they really incorporate a lot of like the cultural performance side of things. So at every school, usually you have a Māori or like some sort of other Polynesian group. And so you'd like meet after school, you'd do performances. They have big festivals for it every year. And I just remember that there were a couple of groups practicing after school, and I was a part of the Māori group that year. And for some reason, I think I had friends in the other group. And so I went over there to see them, and I had my pounamu out. A pounamu is like a greenstone from New Zealand that a lot of like Māori people wear. And I remember someone doing a double take that I was wearing it. And then I think they sort of like realized that I was Māori. And then, it was just a really bizarre moment where I felt like I was being exposed. It felt like it was being received negatively. It wasn't like, oh, you're part Māori, I didn't know that. It was like, oh, you're Māori.
So were there tensions between those groups, or was this just this individual's reaction?
I think it was just this individual's reaction. I think like when you're teenagers, you sort of have those...
I don't think it's the same as my experience with the Blue Stars and the Dynamites when I was in grade school, but I do remember being part of different groups and trying to like move between them.
Yeah, there's like a natural rivalry there.
Yeah, it's like who we are as from an evolutionary perspective.
Yeah.
And when it shows up in grade school or middle school, it's painful.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when you're trying so hard to sort of fit in.
Of course, it's the most important thing is to belong, is to fit in. So let me ask you, you mentioned hard work, like all the hard work you had done with being okay with yourself, and it felt really threatened and almost like pierced in that moment when you're outside having a smoke break with those other students. And I'm just wondering about, what was that work for you? What was that about, and have you continued?
Yeah, so I think, if I'm being honest, it's because the work hadn't really started at that point. Because I was quite young, I was only 21. I think what had happened is I'd gone through sort of between the ages of like 13 to 17, really being angsty, really feeling like no one really understood me, that I didn't really have a place amongst my peers. And also, I think there were a lot of big life things that happened to me in that period as well. So I think there were a lot of things where I was just a bit angry. And I had moved away, and I found a group of people who I felt like I didn't have to prove anything to. So I hadn't really done any work on myself. I think I just was at the beginning of accepting myself, or accepting that I didn't have to be a certain way. I didn't have to like talk a certain way for people to like me or to feel like I was part of a group. So yeah, it's probably just because I was at the beginning stage of going on this journey of, who am I?
Yeah, sure. When you talk about not feeling valid in your feelings because you are not part white as being a distinctive type of mixed race. I thought that was such an interesting moment in your story that was quite eye-opening to me. And I kind of felt like I needed to own the fact that I hadn't really reflected on that before. So I was really looking forward to talking to you about the way the world defines mixed race in reference to whiteness, when in fact, that's not the only definition by any stretch. And then when you made that funny comment, or the comment that the room found funny about whether you were mixed race enough, can you say more about that?
Yeah, no, it wasn't like meant as like a joke at all. But when people started laughing, I thought, oh yeah, that does sound a bit ridiculous. And so I sort of found the humor in it as well and thought like, oh my God, that's really stupid. But yeah, the sort of feeling mixed race enough, yeah. Like you said, I think it was, for me, it's representation in media. I think whenever you see sort of examples of mixedness when it comes to, I guess like family dynamics or individuals on TV shows or in movies, for me, I always felt like that representation was, part white. And so I just didn't feel like I fit into that category. And so I was like, well, I can't be a mixed heritage fan because, I don't look like that person, which is why I was saying that I feel like representation matters so much. And
especially for a young person.
Absolutely, absolutely. My dad growing up would always, so we'd be watching a TV show and he'd be like, that person is Samoan. And we'd kind of be like, oh yeah, okay, sure. It would become the sort of like quirk that he would do, all the time. And me and my brothers would sort of laugh about it. But it wasn't until later in life and I actually thought about what he was doing. And he was just trying to find representation. He was trying to find someone who looked like him in media. And that's just something that I'll always remember now, because at the time it was like, it's just something a bit annoying that your dad does. But actually, it's quite powerful, trying to seek people that look like you or try to make connections.
Absolutely. Well, I think it very much ties to the phase of life you go through when you're an adolescent and a young adult, like in your teens and 20s. And you are quite naturally looking outside yourself for that sense of validation and figuring out where you belong, because you're not yet ready to like pull that inside and make that about your individual decision about where you belong or want to belong, et cetera. So I think that's why young people are particularly susceptible and need to see themselves reflected in the wider culture. And you made the joke about Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. So do Samoan people really claim him?
Oh, yes, 100%. So I grew up watching The Rock in wrestling. So this is where I was sort of first exposed to The Rock. And we had like his posters on our walls. We went to the cinema with my family to watch, I can't remember what it was. I think it was like Jumanji or something, had The Rock in it. And every time he'd come on screen, like everyone would just go absolutely nuts.
I love that.
Yeah, and so my husband didn't really understand why. And I was like, because you do know that The Rock like grew up in New Zealand at some point in his life. And I was like, and Polynesian people really claim him because I think he was one of the first Polynesian faces that we saw in mainstream media. And he was like, oh no, I didn't know that. He's like, I just didn't realize that's why people were like, like everyone was like really reacting when he'd like make a joke on screen. And I was like, no, like The Rock is like Polynesian people like love The Rock.
Yeah, but my understanding is like reputationally, he's like the nicest guy in Hollywood. Yeah. But I love that story of people just being like really identifying with what they're seeing.
Absolutely.
On the screen. I love it.
Yeah.
So I wanted to talk about your experiences and the insights that you've had since, because you said that, I realize in retrospect, I hadn't really done too much work back when you were in your early 20s. Now it's been 10, 12 years since the time of the story. And you've done so much, like even in the last year and a half since you told the story. I know you've done a lot. It would be great to hear what you've been up to, how that's like fueled your insights about yourself, about these themes. Be really nice to catch up on what you're doing these days artistically and personally, professionally.
Yeah, a lot's happened in the year since I've done that story. So I think one of them has been connecting with the Māori and Pacific Island community in London. That's been really great for my soul. So I've started going to Ngāti Rānana, which is it's like a Māori club. They meet every Wednesday, they do gigs, and at the end of every year, they do like a big Christmas concert, which I did recently. I would also say, like, before I went to Ngāti Rānana, I had only met one other Māori in London, in the UK, actually. And so it was just really great to be with my people. And I really forgot how much I missed that. You can travel the world and you can meet all these amazing people and make all these amazing friendships, but there's just something so special about being with people from your country, from your culture. It's just something so special to me. And so I've been really thankful to find this group of people and build new friendships, but also just be able to have the opportunity to sing songs and do dancing and then also share that with other people. So that's been something that's been quite good for me, because I think every time I've gone back to New Zealand and then I've seen just the way that Māori culture and the language is flourishing there, I've always felt like a bit of FOMO.
Oh, sure.
So coming back, I'm always like, oh God, I wish I just had more access to that, or how can I incorporate that in my daily life more? And so, yeah, that's been really great for me, finding that group of people and having those connections. And then I've also exhibited again with Mixed Rage in that time in East London. That was a really special opportunity to have as well, to tap into the London community. But I also got to be able to complete my artistic series. So I feel like it's complete now, which is great. Quite a lot has happened at that time, and it's really interesting listening to that as well, because I feel like I'm listening to almost a different me, still me, but slightly different. Like I said, I was using the term mixed race, which I try not to use anymore.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, I just think mixed heritage just feels more authentic to, I guess, my experience. Because I actually had a conversation with Mixed Rage quite recently about sort of unified language, and also that how we thought we saw ourselves. And there's something just about using that term mixed race that just feels quite small in terms of who I am. Using the term mixed heritage just feels more encompassing of who I am, because I feel like my sort of background is so rich and big, and I just feel like using the term mixed race just doesn't really nourish that, or it doesn't honor it in the same way that it did, or that I felt like it fit using that term in my life when I made that story. So, I sometimes will use it every now and then, but mixed heritage is usually what I tend to use more now.
I love that you had that evolution in such a short period of time as a year. I also, Sina, love that you're not censoring what you said a year ago. You're like, that felt right at the time.
Yeah.
I meant what I said. It felt true and authentic. And now I'm different.
Exactly. And even hearing it back, I sort of cringe because I don't use that word that much anymore, but I wouldn't change anything about the way that I told that story, because like I said, it was so truthful and it was authentic to how I was at that time. And now it's just we change, we evolve. And I think we should also honor those evolutions as well, rather than, because I think also this might be a little bit on a tangent, but, people tend to sort of scrub history off the internet. And sometimes, for myself, I'm just well, that was me 10 years ago, and I might have said some really stupid stuff, but I would like to sort of honor who I've become since then and how we've evolved.
That actually, for me, is such a sign of confidence and groundedness that you can say, I change, I'm growing, and accepting that you knew what you knew and felt what you felt a year or 10 years ago, and now you feel differently. Yeah. And that's a beautiful, good thing.
Yeah.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that.
No worries.
This is where I step into slightly uncomfortable territory, because I don't want to ask you to speak for anyone other than yourself. And I also don't want to ask you to have to teach me things that I might be able to learn on my own, but let me try. I'm just interested in how I and others can be better friends and community members to people of mixed heritage. So I'm just kind of curious if that's something you've given thought to.
I think a lot of it just comes down to context. Mm-hmm. Are we in a conversation, or are you a stranger to me, sort of just prying into something that's actually quite personal for me? I think those are the times where I've been a bit why are you asking me that?
Sure.
Yeah, but I think it's different when you're in a conversation with someone and you can feel that there's a genuine interest there. If you don't know me and you're sort of just, one of the first things you ask me is oh, where are you from?
Sure.
That can be, and I say that, and then people have asked me that, and it's been absolutely fine.
And maybe it's an energetic thing, or it's a tone,
or it's a tone.
And like you said, context. If you're at a party of mutual friends, you can have some sense that the person might be trying to invest in getting to know you, as opposed to mining you for information just for themselves.
Yeah. Also, there have been times in the past that people have asked me the question, and it's sort of been it might not have been their intention. This energy you're coming at me with is quite confrontational. I know you don't mean it to seem that way. So yeah, I think energy, just context, tone, it's all of those things. Like, it's really hard to sort of be like, well, you know, in this situation, definitely do. Or,
no.
You know what I
There's
mean?
no top 10 list of do's and don'ts, but just the idea, I think that idea of paying attention to context is really good general advice, and trying to read the other person.
Yeah.
What are they up for? Are they up for teaching you right now?
Yeah.
You know, are they up for even exploring a friendship at a deeper level of something that's so key to their identity? Yeah. Or should you talk about the weather?
Also, just some people might be really open with you, and some people like just won't want to talk about it. And I think it's when people don't respect those boundaries. That's when I would probably be a bit more closed off, I guess. I know I'm quite an open person, I feel.
Yeah. Well, Sina, one thing I love to ask people is just the experience of actually writing and telling the story. How was it overall for you as one of the things you've done in your life?
It was a really unique experience, actually, because I've never contextualized those feelings in writing before. So I've done stuff through visual art, but I've never actually like sat down and like wrote out a story or like put it into that sort of format before. So that was really interesting, and it was a really reflective process, I think. It was a lot of sort of just like sitting down and really like thinking. Also, when something like that happens to you as well, I tend to sort of like avoid thinking about it. And so you sort of have to really sit with those feelings and sit with those thoughts. Like I said, like format it into a story. Like it was just really interesting.
Yeah, it's such a creative process, but it's also, I think, in my experience of working with so many storytellers now, that it's actually part of growth and learning and figuring ourselves out. Mm-hmm. So it's a very different way of cutting into like self-development. And it doesn't have to be that. Sometimes you're just like retelling something funny or interesting that happened to you. But a lot of times when it's something like your story, where it has much more to do with your identity and these pivotal experiences that have caused you some hurt, but that you've recovered from. It seems like you've recovered from that as an episode and sort of absorbed that into like a new part of your life that you're living, which is so lovely to see. Mm-hmm. So thank you so much for sharing your story and for having this conversation. It's been really lovely.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for listening. For more information about today's storyteller and conversation, check out the show notes. The True Story London podcast is hosted by me, Michelle Toth. Our producer is Ellis Ballard. Our theme music is by Sea Noise. Live recordings were provided by Laughing Around and recorded at 21 Soho. More information about our live shows and workshops can be found at truestorylondon.com. And just one more thing. If you haven't already, please subscribe or follow and rate us on your favorite podcast platform. It really does help us to reach more people. Thanks, and we'll see you for another episode soon.